You ever notice how the second someone says DNA, the conversation just ends like, boom, case closed, no questions, everybody go home? Because apparently DNA is the holy grail, the one thing that never lies, never gets it wrong, never needs a second look. Yeah, not so fast. Because what if I told you not all DNA is created equal? That a tiny, barely there sample on an object that can move, be touched, be transferred, can end up telling a story that might not even be true. And yet we treat it like it's the final word. So today we're digging into the kind of DNA evidence people don't like to question, the microscopic stuff, the touch DNA, the kind that can show up without a person ever being there and somehow still carry the weight of a conversation. And if that makes you a little uncomfortable, good, it should. Welcome back to Misleading Evidence. All right, let's get into this because DNA might sound like the gold standard, the mic drop, case closed kind of evidence. But when you zoom in, especially on tiny samples and so-called touch DNA, it starts looking a whole lot less like a slam dunk and a whole lot more like a question mark. Let's talk about what we're really dealing with. Not a pool of blood, not a clear biological trail. We're talking about a microscopic sample. Something so small it has to be amplified just to be seen in testing. And when you have to amplify something that tiny, you're not just making it visible, you're increasing the chances of noise, contamination, interpretation issues. That's not opinion, that's built into the science. The smaller the sample, the bigger the room for error. Now layer that onto a portable object. That matters more than people think. A fixed surface, like a wall or a floor, tells more of a stable story. But a portable item, that thing has a life. It moves, it's handled, it can be transferred from place to place without anyone realizing it. And suddenly that DNA isn't telling you that person was here during the crime. It's telling you, at best, this DNA ended up here at some point. Big difference. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Secondary transfer. That's the polite scientific way of saying DNA can travel without the person attached to it. You shake someone's hand, they touch an object, and now your DNA is on that object, and you were never anywhere near it. That's not hypothetical. That's been demonstrated in study after study. Some materials like cloth, fabric, textured surfaces are especially good at picking up and holding on to DNA. They're like little vacuum traps for skin cells and fibers. So now ask yourself, if a surface can collect DNA passively, if an item can move around freely, and if the sample itself is so small it needs amplification just to register, how confident are we that we're telling the right story about how it got there? And this is why, in the real world, touch DNA is not supposed to stand alone. It's supposed to be part of a bigger picture. Investigators are trained to look for cooperation. Where's the video? Where's the timeline? Where's the motive? Where's the physical evidence that actually places a person at the scene during the crime? Because DNA, especially touch DNA, doesn't come with a timestamp. It doesn't tell you when it was left. It doesn't tell you how it got there. It just sits there quietly, waiting for someone to assign meaning to it. And when you assign meaning to something that ambiguous, that's where mistakes happen. Let's bring in a real-world example, because this isn't theoretical. Amanda Knox. Her case is one of the most well-known examples of how DNA, especially trace or low-level DNA, can be misinterpreted. There was DNA evidence presented that was treated like it sealed the deal. It sounded convincing, scientific, certain, and yet after years of scrutiny, appeals, and re-examination, she was exonerated. Why? Because the reliability of that DNA evidence, how it was collected, how it was tested, how it was interpreted, fell apart under closer inspection. Now let's contrast that with Brian Koberger. In this case, the DNA evidence, again, a very small sample, has been front and center, and everything around it questioned. The collection, the handling, the interpretation, even the context in which it was found. And then you throw in a plea deal, and suddenly people are left wondering, Was this airtight evidence, or was it pressure built on something that sounds stronger than it actually is? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. DNA has a reputation that sometimes outspaces its reliability, depending on the type. Blood, semen, saliva, those are different conversations. But touch DNA, that's the gray area. That's where things get messy. That's where you need to slow down and ask better questions instead of just nodding along because science said so. And let's talk about juries for a second. You walk into a courtroom and hear DNA match, and it's like a switch flips. People stop questioning. It feels definitive. But the problem is, not all DNA evidence carries the same weight. A large, clear sample tied directly to a crime scene is not the same as a few skin cells on an object that could have been planted days, weeks, or even months prior. That distinction, that's everything. Because if we start treating all DNA as equal, we're setting ourselves up to accept conclusions that haven't actually been proven. We're filling in gaps with assumptions. And in criminal cases, assumptions are dangerous. So when someone says, well, their DNA was there, the real response should be, okay, how did it get there? When did it get there? What else supports that conclusion? Because without those answers, you don't have a complete picture. You have a fragment. And fragments don't convict people, or at least they shouldn't. Now, I'm not saying DNA is useless, not even close. It's one of the most powerful tools we have when it's used correctly in context and alongside other solid evidence. But when it's isolated, especially in its weakest form, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes suggestive, not definitive. And that's a line people don't always want to acknowledge. So let's bring this home with some real questions, because this is where it matters. If DNA can be transferred without direct contact, if certain surfaces can collect and hold onto DNA like a magnet, if a sample is so small it requires amplification, increasing the chance of error, and if there's no timeline attached to when that DNA was left, then how comfortable are we treating it like proof beyond a reasonable doubt? How much weight should one tiny sample carry when everything else is still being debated? And are we asking enough questions, or are we just accepting the narrative because it sounds scientific? Because at the end of the day, evidence shouldn't just exist. It should make sense. It should fit. It should hold up under pressure, not fall apart when you start looking a little closer. So that next time you hear DNA match, don't just nod. Ask what kind, ask how much, ask where, ask when, and most importantly, ask what else there is. Because we are not here to follow headlines. We are here to follow the evidence. All right, you guys, let me know what you think about Touch DNA. Do you think it's credible enough to use in a trial? Or do you think it's too iffy? Leave me a comment and come back and join me and Pete tomorrow at 4 p.m. We're going to be discussing the book Broken Plea. There's a lot of good stuff in there. See ya.
We do not have evidence that the defendant had direct contact with 1122 or with residents of 1122, but we can put his phone in that area.
Trust us, we wanted that to be the case. We've looked for a link and we have not found one. Not one.
We have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.